Interstate 95 turned into hell when Victoria Sterling's Lamborghini Aventador, heiress to an $800 million empire, exploded into flames after colliding with a truck. The woman, trapped in the deformed cabin with a broken leg and gasoline spreading everywhere, screamed desperately as the flames grew closer and closer. Motorists stopped to film with their phones, but no one dared approach the car that could explode at any moment. That's when a 40-year-old man with worn clothes and grease-stained hands emerged from the crowd of onlookers. Marcus Thompson, a homeless mechanic who had been living under Chicago bridges for 3 years. Without hesitation, he threw himself into the flames, smashed the window, and dragged Victoria out 1 second before the car exploded completely. As he held her in his arms, she looked into his eyes, whispering, "Why did you do it? You don't even know me." Marcus's answer would change both their lives, because every life is worth more than any risk. What happened next revealed that the homeless hero was hiding a past no one could have imagined. Interstate 95 between New York and Philadelphia flowed under the scorching August sun when the lives of two completely different people were about to intertwine in the most dramatic way possible. Victoria Sterling, 28 years old and sole heiress to an $800 million industrial empire, was speeding in her azure Lamborghini Aventador toward a family meeting in the Hamptons. That morning, she had fought furiously with her father for the umpteenth time. Richard Sterling wanted her to take seriously her role in the family company, to stop being a spoiled princess and start really working. She had slammed the door, promising she didn't need anyone. She accelerated, pushing the Lamborghini to 110 mph, music at full volume, to drown out her thoughts. She didn't see the truck moving slowly in the right lane until it was too late. The desperate attempt to swerve made the sports car lose traction, crashing into the guardrail, bouncing and ending upside down in the middle of the roadway. The impact was devastating. The Lamborghini deformed like a crushed can, trapping Victoria in the cabin while gasoline began leaking from the damaged tank. The pain in her left leg was excruciating, and a head wound dripped blood into her eyes. Traffic stopped immediately. Dozens of cars lined up as motorists got out to see what had happened. But when they saw gasoline spreading on the asphalt and smelled the acrid odor of flammable vapors, no one dared approach. Instead, many pulled out their phones to film the scene. Victoria, trapped and terrified, screamed for help with an increasingly weak voice. She saw the curious faces of spectators, heard comments about how expensive the destroyed car was, but no one moved to help her. The heat was increasing. Something under the hood had started burning, and small flames licked the engine. It was in that moment of absolute terror that an unexpected figure emerged from the crowd of onlookers. Marcus Thompson, 40 years old, with worn clothes that hadn't seen a washing machine in weeks, unkempt beard, and hands black with grease. People stepped aside as he passed, some with disgust at the smell he carried. Marcus didn't say a word. He assessed the situation with the expert eye of someone who had worked with cars for 20 years before life betrayed him. He saw the gasoline, the flames beginning to spread, the trapped woman who had maybe 30 seconds before everything blew up. Without a moment's hesitation, he took off his worn jacket and immersed it in a puddle of water that had formed on the roadside. He wrapped it around his head and arms, then launched toward the burning car while everyone else backed away. With a decisive punch, he smashed the passenger side window, ignoring the cuts he was getting on his arms. The heat was unbearable and smoke burned his lungs, but he managed to squeeze into the deformed cabin. Marcus cut the seatbelt with a multi-tool knife, then, with superhuman strength, managed to extract Victoria from the car just as flames reached the cabin. He took her in his arms, running toward safety, and 3 seconds later, the Lamborghini exploded in a fireball that shook the asphalt. When they finally stopped at a safe distance, Victoria was in the arms of a man who smelled of street and sweat, but whose eyes had a kindness she had never seen. She whispered hoarsely, "Why did you do it? You don't even know me." Marcus looked at her intensely, gently wiping blood from her face. Because every life is worth more than any risk. Mount Sinai Hospital in New York resonated with the typical emergency room bustle when they brought Victoria in. She had a compound fracture in her left tibia, mild concussion and various lacerations, but she was alive. Marcus had refused any medical checkup and had disappeared into the crowd as he had appeared. Victoria, immobilized in the hospital bed with her leg in a cast, couldn't stop thinking about that man. She had asked everyone if they knew anything about him, but no one knew him. The only thing she had was the description of a homeless man who had risked everything for a stranger. Richard Sterling arrived from the airport with a grey face of worry. When he saw his daughter alive in the hospital bed, the tears he had held back for hours finally flowed. Richard immediately set his research machine in motion: private investigators, police contacts, analysis of highway surveillance cameras. In 24 hours, he had a name: Marcus Thompson. But what they discovered shocked them both. Marcus hadn't always been homeless. Until 3 years ago, he had been one of Chicago's most respected mechanics, owner of a successful shop specializing in luxury cars. Wealthy clients, Ferraris and Lamborghinis that passed through his expert hands, a reputation built on 20 years of impeccable work. Then came the tragedy that destroyed everything. Marcus was married to Sarah, a nurse at Children's Memorial Hospital, and they had an 8-year-old daughter, Emma. A happy family living in Lincoln Park, in an apartment Marcus had bought with his earnings. One December evening, while returning home from the shop, Marcus received a phone call that froze his blood. A car accident. Sarah and Emma were going to a Christmas recital when a drunk driver ran a red light, hitting their sedan head-on. Sarah died on impact. Emma survived for 3 days in intensive care before giving up. Marcus sold everything to pay hospital debts and legal expenses from the trial. But above all, he sank into a depression so deep he lost the ability to take care of himself. In 3 years, he had slipped lower and lower until he found himself living under the Wabash Bridge with other homeless people. But his hands still retained the magic of the trade learned in 20 years. 2 days later, against medical advice, Victoria left the hospital with crutches. She had a debt of honor to settle, and nothing would stop her. The Wabash Bridge in Chicago hid a reality Victoria had never imagined could exist. Under the stone arches, a small village of desperate people had found shelter from the elements. Cardboard and plastic sheets formed makeshift shelters, rusty barrels burned wood collected from the streets. Victoria got out of the Mercedes with her crutches. Her designer clothes made her seem like an alien landed in a parallel world. The homeless watched her with curiosity mixed with suspicion. An elderly man looked at her from his blankets. Victoria explained she was looking for Marcus Thompson, the one who had saved a woman on the highway 3 days before. A murmur rose from the group. The story had already reached them. Marcus emerged from behind one of the improvised shelters. He had tried to clean his face, but it was evident that Victoria's presence made him uncomfortable. He couldn't understand what she was doing there in his world of misery. Victoria explained she had come to thank him, but Marcus replied he had done what anyone would have done. She insisted it wasn't true. There were dozens of people there, but only he had risked his life for a stranger. Marcus felt uncomfortable under everyone's gaze. That woman represented everything he had lost. He told her that now that she had seen he was okay, she could return to her life. Victoria revealed she knew what he had been through, that she knew the story of Sarah and Emma. The names of his women were like a stab. Marcus told her she had no right to pronounce those names. She admitted she was wrong, but said she had the right to know why the man who saved her life lived like this. Marcus confessed he deserved that life because he had killed his family. If he hadn't worked late that evening, if he had gone to pick them up at the recital himself, Victoria interrupted him with the logic that if she hadn't fought with her father, she wouldn't have ended up on the highway. And if she hadn't ended up there, He wouldn't have had the chance to save a life. The silence was broken only by the crackling of fires in the barrels. Marcus asked what she wanted from him. Victoria replied she wanted him to return to living. He said he no longer knew how to do it. Victoria approached until she was close enough to smell the street odor. She told him that morning she believed the world owed her everything. But tonight, she knew he had given her everything. She wanted to give him a second chance at living. The following days were strange for both. Victoria had taken the habit of stopping by the Wabash Bridge every afternoon, sitting on the steps and talking with Marcus and the other homeless. She didn't bring money or small charity, she brought listening and respect. Marcus was initially suspicious, convinced it was just a whim from a bored rich woman. But day after day, he saw that Victoria wasn't faking interest. She really listened to the stories of those who had lost everything, asked sincere questions, remembered names and personal details. Every story was a collapsed world, a destiny that had taken a wrong turn. Victoria began to understand that the difference between her golden world and the one under the bridge was much thinner than she had ever imagined. Marcus, seeing that Victoria wasn't there for morbid curiosity but for genuine human interest, slowly began to open up. He told her about Sarah, who sang in the shower, about Emma, who wanted to be a veterinarian, about the small house they had furnished together, dream by dream. One evening, while watching the Chicago River flow, Marcus confessed he had had everything a man could desire. Not riches, but fulfillment. Then, in one night, everything vanished. Victoria understood he had decided that pain was the only thing that kept him close to them. It was the following week that Victoria made the proposal that would change everything. She had a garage that her father had bought 3 years ago in Cicero. It had been closed since then because they had never found the right mechanic to reopen it. She wanted Marcus to manage it completely. She and her father would be silent partners. He would have full operational autonomy. Marcus protested he couldn't accept charity. Victoria explained it wasn't charity but business. That area was growing, new construction, young families. They needed a trustworthy garage. She pulled out the keys to the family Mercedes, which had an engine problem unresolved for weeks. Marcus took the keys with trembling hands. He hadn't touched the keys to an expensive car in 3 years. But when he opened the Mercedes hood and leaned over the engine, something in him awakened. 5 minutes later, he had identified the problem, a defective sensor, a repair costing $20 and half an hour of time. Victoria saw a spark born in Marcus's eyes, the same one she had seen when he saved her from the burning car. Marcus accepted, but set conditions. He wanted to hire some of his street companions. He wouldn't abandon them. Victoria felt her heart filled with pride for that man's goodness. She accepted, but also set a condition. He had to promise her he wasn't doing it out of guilt, but because Sarah and Emma would have wanted him to return to living. Marcus closed his eyes, and for a moment almost heard his wife's voice. "I accept." The Cicero garage had been closed for 3 years, but had good bones. Richard Sterling had invested a fortune to restore it, assuming his daughter was going through a passing philanthropic phase. But Victoria had never been more serious in her life. Marcus slept in the small apartment above the garage, and every morning came down with increasingly clear eyes and a more groomed beard. The most evident change was in his hands. After weeks under the bridge, they had become rough and neglected, but now that they returned to touching engines and tools, they regained a surgeon's sensitivity. Maria was the first to be hired. Her years as a nurse had accustomed her to precision, perfect qualities for managing appointments and invoices. George, despite his age, retained a prodigious memory for spare parts. Thompson Motors reopened on a Monday in September. The first customer was a retiree with a Honda that was leaking oil. Marcus solved the problem in 20 minutes and asked only for the price of the spare part. Word spread quickly. There was a mechanic who worked well, fast and honest. Victoria stopped by the garage every day, officially to check the investment, actually because she couldn't stay away from that world that had saved her. Seeing Marcus gradually return to life, She too was discovering who she really wanted to be. The turning point came when a customer brought a Ferrari 488 with a complex electrical problem. Official dealers had asked $2,000 for diagnosis. Marcus worked on it for 2 days until he found a hidden short circuit that no computer had detected. The repair cost $300 and 3 hours of work. The owner was so impressed he started sending all his friends to Marcus. Word of mouth in the luxury car world is fast. Soon the garage filled with Porsches, Maseratis, Lamborghinis. One evening, while closing the garage, Marcus confessed to Victoria it was different from the past. Before he did it for money, now because it made him happy to see a broken thing return to functioning. Victoria understood he wasn't just talking about cars. With the garage's success, Marcus began to afford small luxuries, clean clothes, a decent haircut, restaurant dinners. But the most important change was internal. He had started smiling again, seeing the future as something more than simply surviving. One October evening, Victoria asked if he still thought about them every day. Marcus confessed yes, every minute, but now it was a different pain. Before it was pain that wanted to destroy him, now it was pain that reminded him how much he had loved them. Victoria asked why a millionaire spent her days in a Cicero garage. She replied that for the first time she felt useful for something, not because she was born rich, but because she had chosen to do something good. Marcus looked at her with new tenderness.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
In the months they had spent together, he had seen Victoria transform from spoiled princess to a woman with real substance. As they walked toward their cars in the golden sunset, Marcus said that accident had saved them both. Winter arrived with Chicago's first rains drumming on the garage roof. Thompson Motors had become the preferred destination for anyone owning a valuable car in the area. Marcus had hired 2 more mechanics, and Victoria had practically moved into the office above the garage. The real change was in Marcus. The broken man who lived under the bridge had disappeared, replaced by someone who had found a purpose in life again. He wasn't the man he was before. That one would never return. But he had become a better version, forged by pain and tempered by gratitude. The moment that changed everything came on a December evening. Victoria was working late on the books when she heard sobs coming from the garage. She found Marcus sitting next to a white Volkswagen Jetta, identical to the one Sarah used to drive. Marcus explained that for a moment he had believed he had gone back in time. He confessed they missed him so much that sometimes he couldn't breathe. Victoria sat next to him on the cold garage floor, explaining it was normal, that he would always love Sarah and Emma, but this didn't mean he couldn't love something else. Marcus looked at her as if he had heard her for the first time. Victoria felt her heart accelerate. It was time to say what she had been feeling for months. She confessed to being in love with him, with the man that love for his family had made so special. Marcus remained silent for an eternity, then stood up and gently took her hands. He confessed to being in love with her too, and this terrified him because it meant really starting over. Victoria asked if they could try together, them and the ghosts they carried. Marcus looked at her for a long time, then caressed her face. Sarah always told him that true love doesn't exclude, it includes. Maybe it was time to believe her. Their first kiss was sweet and salty with tears, the kiss of 2 people who had crossed hell and found each other on the other side. It wasn't the unconscious love of youth, but something deeper, the love of those who know how fragile happiness is. The following months were of slow and patient construction. Marcus took Victoria to the cemetery where Sarah and Emma rested, introducing the woman who had saved his life. Victoria took Marcus to dinner with her parents, where the former homeless man won over Richard talking about engines. The garage continued to prosper, but above all became the symbol of what 2 people could build together, transforming pain into purpose. Marcus hired other former homeless people, creating a network of second chances. On the first anniversary of the highway accident, Marcus and Victoria returned to the exact spot where they had met. It had become tradition. Every year, they returned there to remember how destiny had intertwined their lives in their darkest moment. Victoria said she believed Sarah and Emma had sent Marcus to save her because they knew she would save him. Marcus smiled at that romantic and impossible theory that nonetheless warmed his heart. That evening, Marcus put the ring on Victoria's finger. It wasn't the $1 million solitaire she could have afforded, but a simple ring he had chosen and paid for with his earnings. The wedding was celebrated in the Sterling Estate garden, but the real party was held in the decorated garage. During the toast, Marcus said the words that remained in everyone's hearts. Sometimes life destroys us completely, but if we're lucky, someone saves us from the flames. And if we're truly blessed, we discover that by saving someone else, we save ourselves too. 5 years later, Thompson Motors had become a chain of garages extending throughout Illinois, always maintaining the philosophy of giving second chances. Marcus and Victoria had 2 children, Sarah and Richard, names that honored both past and present. Every evening, Marcus told the children the story of how he met their mother by saving her from flames. And he always concluded saying, "True love isn't what we receive, but what we're willing to give, even when it seems we have nothing left to give." The story became legend in Chicago, not for the fairy tale ending, but for proving that from the deepest tragedies, the most authentic happiness can be born. That true love doesn't erase past pain, but transforms it into strength to build the future. Anyone passing by the original garage could see a plaque dedicated to Sarah and Emma Thompson, who from heaven continue to watch over love on earth. Because true love never ends. It transforms, evolves, includes more and more people in its circle of light. And sometimes it arrives in the form of a stranger who saves us from flames, teaching us that every life is worth more than any risk. But the story of Marcus and Victoria continued far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The Thompson Foundation, established 5 years after their marriage, became one of the most innovative organizations in America for helping homeless populations transition back into productive lives. Unlike traditional charities that provided temporary shelter, the Thompson Foundation focused on what Marcus knew worked, giving people meaningful work that restored their dignity and sense of purpose. They established a network of training centers across the Midwest, teaching automotive skills, construction trades, and small business management. Victoria discovered she had a natural talent for organizational psychology. She completed her master's degree at Northwestern University while running the foundation, writing her thesis on trauma-informed workforce development. Her research showed that people who had experienced significant loss often became the most compassionate and dedicated employees once given proper support. The foundation's flagship program became Second Chance Motors, a network of community garages in economically depressed areas. Each location was staffed primarily by formerly homeless individuals who had completed the foundation's 6-month training program. These weren't charity shops, but legitimate businesses that competed successfully with established auto repair chains. Marcus often traveled to speak at the grand openings of new locations. He would stand in front of audiences of city officials, social workers, and local business owners, still wearing his simple mechanic's uniform, and tell his story, not as inspiration porn, but as proof of concept. The homeless crisis isn't about lack of housing, he would say. It's about lack of hope. When someone loses everything, family, home, identity, they need more than a roof. They need to remember who they are capable of being. The statistics backed him up. Participants in Second Chance Motors had a 94% employment retention rate after 2 years, compared to 23% for traditional job placement programs. More importantly, they were rebuilding lives, not just collecting paychecks. Victoria's role evolved from social worker to policy advocate. She testified before Congress about the economic benefits of trauma-informed workforce development. Conservative politicians who normally oppose social spending found themselves supporting Thompson Foundation initiatives because they actually saved taxpayer money while achieving better outcomes. The couple's children, Sarah and Richard, grew up understanding both privilege and purpose. Every summer they spent weeks working at different foundation locations, not as the boss's kids, but as regular volunteers. Sarah, now 12, had already announced her intention to study social work and continue the family mission. Richard, 10, was more interested in engineering but talked about designing better tools for automotive training programs. The original Cicero garage remained the heart of the operation, deliberately kept modest despite the foundation's growth. Marcus still worked there personally 2 days a week, partly to stay connected to the actual work, partly because he found peace in the simple act of fixing things that were broken. On quiet evenings, when the last customer had gone and the garage grew still, Marcus would sometimes find himself thinking about the chain of events that had brought him here. If Sarah and Emma hadn't died, he never would have become homeless. If he hadn't been homeless, he wouldn't have been on that bridge when Victoria's accident happened. If he hadn't saved Victoria, none of this would exist. It wasn't that he was grateful for the tragedy. He would trade every achievement to have his first family back. But he had learned to live with what the therapists called both-and thinking. He could simultaneously grieve his losses and celebrate his blessings. He could honor Sarah and Emma's memory while building a life with Victoria and their children. Victoria often found him in these contemplative moods. She had learned not to interrupt with false cheerfulness or attempts to fix his sadness. Instead, she would simply work alongside him, her presence a quiet reminder that he was no longer alone with his thoughts. "Do you think they would be proud?" he asked one evening as they closed up the garage together. Victoria knew he meant Sarah and Emma. She had stopped feeling threatened by these conversations years ago, understanding that his love for his first family was part of what made his love for her so deep and authentic. "I think they sent you to save me, so I could help you save others," she replied, echoing a conversation they'd had years before. "I think love multiplies, it doesn't divide." The Thompson Foundation continued expanding, but it also deepened its impact. They added programs for veterans with PTSD, former addicts in recovery, and elderly people aging out of the workforce. Each program followed the same principle: meaningful work as a pathway to dignity and community belonging. By their 10th wedding anniversary, the foundation operated 47 locations across 12 states. They had trained and placed over 3,000 formerly homeless individuals, with a collective annual income of $180 million. These weren't just statistics. They represented 3,000 people who had moved from despair to purpose, from isolation to community. The anniversary party was held naturally in the original garage. Hundreds of people came: foundation graduates, board members, city officials, and families of staff. But the moment that defined the evening came when a shy teenager approached Marcus during the reception. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Jake. My dad went through your program 3 years ago." Marcus remembered Jake's father, a Vietnam veteran who had been living in his car when he entered the program. Now he managed one of their Detroit locations. "He talks about you every day," Jake continued. "He says you saved his life, but I wanted to thank you for saving mine too. Before the program, I thought my dad was just broken. Now I know he's a hero who had some really bad luck." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever he was reminded of the ripple effects of their work. Saving one person often meant saving their entire family, sometimes for generations. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus and Victoria found themselves alone in the garage where their love story had begun. The space was decorated with photos chronicling their journey: Marcus under the bridge, their first day at the garage, their wedding, the birth of their children, foundation milestones. "Regrets?" Victoria asked. a question that had become ritual between them. None, Marcus replied without hesitation. Grief, yes. Sadness for what could have been, absolutely. But regrets? No. Every choice led us here. Victoria nodded, understanding the distinction. They had both learned that healing didn't mean forgetting or getting over loss. It meant integrating tragedy into a larger story of meaning and service. Their children, now teenagers, had invited friends to the party. As Marcus watched them laughing and planning their own futures, he felt a familiar sense of wonder. Sarah and Richard had grown up understanding that their family's wealth came with responsibility, but more importantly, they had learned that true security came from being useful to others. The Thompson Foundation continued evolving, but its core mission remained unchanged, proving that every person has value, that everyone deserves a second chance, and that sometimes the most broken people become the most powerful healers. Marcus still kept a photo of his first family on his desk, not as a shrine to the past, but as a reminder of why the work mattered. Sarah and Emma had taught him what love was. Victoria and their children had taught him that love could survive and even thrive after devastating loss. "They're all watching," Victoria said softly, following his gaze to the photo. "I know," Marcus replied, "and I think they're proud of what we've built together." Outside, Chicago hummed with its usual energy. Somewhere in the city, there were people sleeping under bridges, people who had lost everything and didn't know how to start over. But there were also 47 garages staffed by people who had been exactly where they were, ready to offer more than charity, ready to offer hope, dignity, and a chance to remember who they were capable of becoming. The love that had begun with a rescue on a burning highway had multiplied into something larger than either Marcus or Victoria could have imagined. It had become proof that redemption was possible, that broken people could heal others, and that sometimes the greatest tragedies create the opportunity for the greatest love. Like if you believe true love is born when we save someone by saving ourselves. Comment telling about a time someone saved you in your darkest moment. Share to honor those who risk everything to save a stranger. Subscribe for more stories of rebirth that change lives. Sometimes the hero we're looking for is the one everyone ignores. Sometimes from the most terrible accident comes the most beautiful love. And sometimes saving someone from flames means saving our own soul too.